Life throws punches. We get knocked down. Only some people get knocked down from many different directions.
But what defines us isn't the fall or how many times we fall, it's how we rise.
Hello, I'm Satvinder Rana, and this is the story of Dr. Amu Raju.
Amu Raju was born with cerebral palsy to immigrant parents in an inner city area. His life seemed destined for struggle.
But you know what? Amu refused to let his disability hold him back. He found his inner strength, used it to his advantage, and changed his destiny. Today, Amu is the Chief Executive at Disability Direct, a multi-million-pound third sector organisation. He was awarded an honorary doctorate by the University of Derby. He's got an OBE for services to disabled people, and he's also the Deputy Lieutenant for Derbyshire. And he's won numerous national awards for his achievements. He's one hell of a guy. Let's go and meet him.
Amu Raju doesn't just tell his story, he shares the tools for success and resilience.
Amu, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you I'm really looking forward to this.
You've had one hell of a journey throughout your life. You're an inspiration to many, many people around the country. As Chief Executive of Disability Direct, you've achieved so much. What's it been like being the Chief Executive of a thriving charity?
First of all, it's an honour. It's a real honour to be in this position and having held this position for so long. 30 years with the charity and 27 years as CEO. And it's been an interesting journey as a CEO as well, because if you ask me within different decades, you'd get a different answer. The first decade when I was a CEO, I was full of energy and passion and a bit of frustration and hunger. It all came out. And the second decade was full of challenges. And then this last few years, things have mellowed out a little bit. But then when you look at the minutiae, the detail in all that time, if you ask me different days of the week, you'll get a different answer. Sometimes I'm quite relaxed and chilled. Sometimes I get quite angry but that's probably more old age now than anything. I feel frustrated that I want to do things. Part of it now is I'm feeling old and I get a little tired, and I think I want to do this and I can't, so I have to hand it over to somebody else because they've got the energy and drive to do it. So yeah, as I say, different answer based on on each decade and sometimes day of the week.
One doesn't become a chief executive overnight. It must have been a journey through life to get to the stage where you are now. Just take us back in terms of Amu Raju as a person, as a child, growing up here in Derby. What was life like as a child?
I was the first child born to the Raju family when they came to this country in the 60s, late 60s I was born. And so the family was still trying to settle and understand their environment. And then on top of that, they had a disabled child. And there had never been disability in my family, going back decades before that. So there was no experience of how to handle a disabled child or a disabled person in general. So they had their hands full, if I'm honest with you. They didn't, they were trying to assimilate into a new country. They didn't really speak the language very well. My dad was probably the only person in the house when he came to understand English. And I'll give you a classic example. I have cerebral palsy, which affects my right side. I didn't know I had cerebral palsy till I was about 22 years old. And I asked my parents, I said, surely there was a diagnosis as a child. They said there was, but we didn't understand it.
Right.
We didn't know what it meant. The way it was interpreted to us was that he's just weak on one side. So I grew up as a child, as a teenager, just thinking I'm just a little bit weak. When the term cerebral palsy hit me, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Because again, I just did not understand what it meant, and I had to do a lot of research, and this was before the internet, so I just had to do a lot of reading in leaflets and libraries just to understand what was going on with me. So that's your example of how they were a little detached from the system in understanding what was happening to their child. I had 3 surgical operations as a child, with orthopedic surgeons trying to correct my walk. And again, they didn't quite fully understand what they were doing. Muscles were being cut here and there, and tendons being lengthened, and it just didn't. All they were thought, well, it's going to make him walk a bit better. They didn't understand what was really going on. But saying that, Sati, the interesting thing is, I was told, but my parents were told that their toddler wasn't going to walk, because that's when they first realised something was wrong. I was at the age of 1.5 years, I still wasn't walking, and this is where the Indian side, the Desi side as I call it, came out. They went and took me to Birmingham. There used to be a wrestler there, or somebody who was very well known for massaging. And as a child, they took me there, and he was. This is strange. At that age, I can recall going to see him. So I must have only been about 2 years old, and I can remember him going to town on my legs and joints. And I also, I don't remember the actual time it happened, but my mum says, she goes, I just suddenly started holding onto the furniture and started walking, and then started holding onto the walls and started walking, and that was before any medical intervention. So, they had some of their thoughts and beliefs and experiences which kind of astounded the medical professionals here, and then they took it from there, shall we say. They said, right, this is where we step in and do some surgical operations.
Was there a point in your childhood when you realised that maybe I'm, slightly different abled compared to other children?
No. And this is a weird thing. My first surgical operation was when I was about 6 years old.
Right.
And as far as I was aware, other kids must be having surgical operations as well. Because when I went to the hospital, there was a hospital in Mansfield, and there were other kids there. So I thought, okay, well, all these kids, obviously I cried as a child because I was away from my parents. But because I saw other kids there, I thought, well, it must be something that all kids go through. And then my next surgery was when I was about 8 or 9. That's when I felt a little strange, because my schoolmates, they weren't having surgery. I was now.
Yeah.
And I had to take off around 2 or 3 months off school, and I had to learn how to walk again, because I had my hamstrings stretched, and it basically meant I had to walk again. I can remember it being agony trying to learn that again. And that's when I thought something's not right. But again, as a child, you literally walk it off, don't you? You just think, right, I just wanted to play with my mates. As soon as I started walking again, back to normal, playing with my mates in the street, like every kid did, kick a football around in the street with all my mates. And so I didn't feel any different. It was only until we got to about the age of 12 when I started getting bullied at school. And the bullying was about some girls were imitating my walk. That's when I suddenly realised I'm different. They're doing this to me because I'm not like the others. And I went from being a grade A student to pretty mediocre, pretty average overnight. And I wanted to look for any excuse not to go to school. Yeah. So I kind of left school with very little qualifications. And I was pleased to have left that school. It was a great school, and I was the only disabled child in the whole school. So and we're going back to the 70s, early 80s. They didn't have those safeguarding processes in place that you have today. So I won't hold it against the school. They didn't understand. I did report it to one or two of the teachers, and they didn't fully understand what to do either.
Yeah.
So it was a different time.
Yeah. So for a child, you know, of that age, growing up and going to school, facing what you faced, it must have had an impact on you in terms of self-confidence and, you know, your ambitions for the future and so on. You said that, you know, you went from grade A to a mediocre student. Yeah. Did it affect you emotionally? I mean, it must have affected you emotionally, but, you know, just talk us through how it felt at that point.
It certainly did. And the thing here is, I must have been around 9 years old, and I was watching TV. I was watching Rainbow on TV that used to come on at lunchtimes. And Mum went into the kitchen to make some tea because some of her friends had come round.
Yeah.
You know, like they did. Housewives used to get together, and these housewives that came round decided to have a conversation in Punjabi about me.
Okay.
And that conversation went along the lines of, isn't it a shame? Who's going to marry him? Who's going to give them his daughter? Which father would quite rightly do that in his right mind? And that's not a conversation a 9-year-old needs to hear. But suddenly at the age of 9, I was having to think about marriage. And again, that's another time when I felt, I'm not the same as everybody else. Why are they talking about me in this way? And it played on me for a while. And I really felt for the rest of, all through my secondary school as well, whilst the boys were interested in girls and stuff like that, I honestly thought nobody was going to marry me. I thought I will probably be single all my life. So I again withdrew a little bit on that front, as well as the educational side. I just reconciled to the fact that maybe I'm just going to have a different life to others. So yes, it did affect me, and that was my first real experience of being depressed as a child, and not able to be able to talk to anybody about it, because you don't really go to your parents and say, Mom, Dad, why is nobody going to marry me? You know, it's just you just don't do that. And I was the older, but it wasn't anything I could really talk to my siblings about. Yeah. I was the oldest child, and so I just kind of bottled it in, as many.
So as a child, what was playing on your mind was the kind of difficulty you would have in finding a life partner, rather than a job, occupation, and so on.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing. You know, again, certain professionals had conversations with my dad, and my dad, when I started learning to drive, my dad was so pleased, because he said he was told that your son's not going to be able to drive. And so it's those kind of little things that I was almost written off to some extent, and it does have an effect. I was growing up with this belief that I will probably not amount to much. You know, other children were thinking, my dad used to say, like many fathers, he'd have a drink and he'd say, you're going to be a doctor. You've got to be a doctor. It's the only way you're going to survive in this world. No one's going to give you a job. And I said, well, you know, every father's a hero. I said, Dad, I want to work in the factory like you do. I want to go where you go. And he goes, you won't be able to do it. This is going to be... And I didn't understand why he'd say that, because I felt strong. I thought I could work the factory floors like everybody else. But, he was right. There's no way I would have been able to do it. So I could see his logic as to why he needed me to be in a desk job, basically. And there was the problem. He wanted me to get educated and have a desk job, but I was doing everything I could to stay away to school if I had a choice. I didn't. I paid attention in class, but it wasn't soaking in the way it should have done, because I had all these other thoughts going on in my head. Which, and sometimes I even say to myself, is this an excuse? Is this an excuse for me being, educationally lazy? It wasn't. It was. I was affected. Looking back, I think it really did.
Was there a point in your childhood when you developed coping strategies with all that?
Yeah, TV was an escape for me, and we're talking about a time when the VHS player came in, and Bollywood films was an escape for me, like it was for any people, and I just escaped into those worlds, and I started I started listening to a lot of songs, and they would be an escape for me. I still now have a massive collection of 70s and 80s songs from both Bollywood and the Western world, and it was my escape. It was my way of just switching off, shutting the rest of the world out. And I can remember having a big ding dong with my parents because I wanted a hi-fi system. I said, that's the only thing I want. I don't care about anything. I want a hi-fi system. And they didn't understand it because they weren't into it. Yeah. They weren't into music. And somebody even said to my parents, don't buy him one. He's going to get into music. He'll probably become a singer. And that frightened them a little bit. But I ended up getting my way, and I got a hi-fi system, and that was it. I'd lock myself in the front room, and I only had about 3 LPs, but I just played them over and over again because that was my escape. Or I'd put the radio on and listen to anything that was going, and just trying to understand how were these songs made, and it was just a world for me that really fascinated me, and I wanted to be part of it, never thinking that I ever would.
As a child, entering into your teenage years, all young people want to be with other people, have a social life, play, go out. What was your social life like, and how were you received by some of your peers, some of your friends?
Here's the thing. As soon as I left school, those girls that had bullied me throughout those 4 or 5 years, they were no longer there. So to me it was a blank slate. It was a clean slate that I thought, I've gone, I went to Derby College, Will Morton, and I overnight, this is no exaggeration, I overnight changed into this hyperactive, very loud character. That wasn't me, but it could have been a front. I don't know. Looking back, I can't believe I behaved the way I did. I became very in your face in front of other my peers, and I would be the one in the group of lads that would be the first one to stand up and go and talk to the girls, or something, and they'd just look at me like, where did he get that confidence from? And that's I can't explain it. I'm sure there's some psychologist that could write a paper on that as to what I did and why I did behave that way. But I became loud. I suddenly developed a hairstyle. I developed a sense of clothing, and the confidence levels were off the charts.
Yeah. Would that be the point at which you thought, right, I'm going to create my own identity?
It was, and the new environment really helped. Yeah. I had this desire to make a name for myself, not as because I was a good kid. At school, I was a good kid, never got in trouble or anything. But I had this unexplainable desire to be naughty. I just wanted to. It's like it was cool if you're going to get told off by someone.
I think we've all been through that
we
phase.
Probably have, yeah.
But a bit of rebelliousness.
It was, and that's probably the right word. I became a rebel, and I, whatever was going, and whatever people said, don't do that, I did it.
Yeah.
And your classic example of that is late 1984, or was it early 85? The college had a talent contest, and the lads that I was knocking around with, they said, you should enter that. I said, what, you mean I should enter that? Because I was loud, I was a loud character. And cut a long story short, I ended up in a band, in a Bhangra band, and I ended up singing. I had no training. I could scream a song out. There was no tune in me, but we got together, a couple of lads, and one played the tabla, the Indian drums, and one played the keyboards, and then I started singing for a dance group. And before I realised it, I had a bit of a name for myself as somebody who is Amo the singer, not Amo the disabled guy.
Yeah.
And I loved it, the fact that my disability wasn't the issue. People were talking about, this guy can sing. And at that time, I was probably one of the only singers in Derby. I know there was one or two others floating around, but I never met them. So I can't even give you their names. But I was singing loud and proud, probably getting the words wrong, but I didn't care.
Yeah.
I just had a name for myself, and it was great walking down the road. People would stop me constantly. No, I'd never know who they were, and they'd want to talk to me and shake my hand. And you know, I grew up in a time, and it still happens today, to be honest with you. I don't know why I'm referring to it as that time. People would stare at me when I walked down the street because I was the only disabled guy walking down the street, and it was the South Asian community has a really bad habit of that.
Yeah.
I can walk in a white area and nobody really looks at me, but in an area where there's a South Asian community, it was the stare that followed me. But then there was a time, that was a period where people were wanting to stop me, and my disability wasn't an issue. It was suddenly, God, I saw you on stage last week or on that last gig, and you were amazing, you were great, and my ego just went up another notch. And
you know, for somebody in your 20s, a young lad, and you know, trying to find a place for himself in the world, and trying to find an identity and some recognition, it must have been empowering for you to be able to do something that 98% of the population couldn't do.
No, and I tried to analyse this years later as to what I liked about that period. And I'll tell you what was the best feeling on the planet. And it still happens today. Sometimes I'm at weddings and either DJ recognises me or my friends just push me onto stage and they go and get this one song out of me. That feeling when I was about 19, 20, 21, when I had a microphone in my hand, and I controlled these people. I sang and they danced to what I was doing, and I thought it was a very powerful position to be in, and I loved it. And that the emotional release of hormones that went to my head, I can't repeat it. I can only repeat it when it's going well on stage and I'm singing a song. And as I say, it doesn't happen that often nowadays. Probably once a year I'll end up on stage singing a song to my children's embarrassment. But it's that time I really needed that adrenaline and those dopamine levels increasing inside me to feel good about myself.
And when you were on stage singing and all these people dancing to your tune, did you forget about your disability? Or was that always there?
It wasn't there. As far as I was concerned, it wasn't there. Nobody mentioned it at all. The fellow band members never mentioned it. You know, when my book came out a couple of years ago, one of my friends who was in the band with me, he goes, I've just read your book. And I didn't realise your disability was affecting you the way you say it was, because we just had you as a fellow band member.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the crowd. They were dancing to the song of a person who couldn't dance himself. That's a strange kind of scenario to be in. I couldn't dance because of my disability. I'll do the odd dad dancing now, you know. Well, in those days you wouldn't see me dance because it was impossible for me. It was painful. So So yeah, that feeling was incredible, and I'm really pleased. And you're right, you know, the vast majority of the population doesn't get to experience that, and I'm privileged that I had that. The Almighty gave me that experience because I found it useful in other ways later on in life.
So would you say, you know, being a Bhangra singer was the kind of founding of your ambition to do something, and you thought, you know, I can do something that a lot of other people can't do, which means that there may be other avenues open to me to explore my full potential?
That is a good question. That was the beginning of an addiction for me. The ability to do something that other people couldn't do. And this is the thing about disabled people. Disabled people are always trying to prove to the non-disabled world, not only can I do that, I'll do it better and I'll go beyond you. Because they're having to prove this constantly. And I didn't realise that was the issue with me at that time. That whatever the world said, like I said earlier, the world said you shouldn't do that. Boy, did I do it. Because I made sure that I proved to them that I've got the guts, the confidence, and the hunger to do what you said I shouldn't do.
And have you found that in other disabled people, because you work with disabled people, that, you know, that there is that hunger, there is that ability inside, they just need to channel it. That, you know, once it comes out, it can achieve, you know, amazing results.
I see a lot more in today's generation. My generation, there are probably a handful of people I could point out and say they've had similar experiences. But today's generation is a lot more confident. They what I call, they own the disability, and that's something I've been really shouting about. That disabled people, the minute you own that impairment, that's when you suddenly your confidence levels automatically improve. And in my day, as a teenager and as a child, we didn't have role models. We didn't have other disabled people in the media. We didn't see them on Coronation Street or EastEnders or anything. It just didn't happen. Let alone Bollywood films. I mean, you know, people who of my skin color who look like me, you don't see disabled people in those films unless they're the villain. So it just needed the world to kind of progress forward for this next generation to feel that way, and I'm so encouraged that I see now more and more disabled people from all backgrounds just out there doing stuff. I get jealous. Last week I was at an exhibition and I saw so many young disabled people, and I felt so jealous. I thought if I was 20, 30 years younger, I'd be up there with you. I'd be doing that.
So earlier on you talked about you know, some of your family members kind of questioning whether you would be able to find a life partner, whether somebody would marry you, etc. But here you are, you're a Bhangra star, people admire you, you get on stage, you're full of confidence, you got people around you, you can do something that a lot of other people can't. Did those kind of trying to form a relationship, or in other words, what I'm asking is, you know, finding a girlfriend and getting into a relationship, was that something that you kind of just went into, or did you have to think, well, hang on, you know, I need to make sure that I'm acceptable to whoever I want to form a relationship with? Did those kind of thoughts come into your head then?
Yeah, they did, and despite me being loud and proud, and I could talk to girls, but I still found it difficult to think, right, which one's going to marry me? Which one am I going to try and, you know... And it just happened. You know, I saw a girl who today I'm pleased is my wife, and I went up to her and I asked her out. I asked her out. For 2 years I asked her out. She kept saying no.
We've all been there.
Yeah, and this is it. This is my level of confidence. I kept going for it. I said to her on the first time I met her, I said, "You're going to marry me," and she just laughed. And one of my friends went up to her, you know, a year later and said, "Why won't you go out with him? Is it because he's disabled?" She goes, "No, it's because he's an idiot." And and that's when I realised I need to mellow a little bit. I need to chill.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm frightening her a little bit. And the moment I started mellowing, that's when she warmed to me, and then we ended up dating, and then we got married. That wasn't easy because her family still couldn't accept the disability, and that's a story of its own. But yeah, it's this ability to, and a lot of disabled people say this, that relationships is their greatest challenge. There was I'll tell you a short story. I was about must have been 95, 96. My little lad used to have this habit, or every Saturday I used to go shopping alone because my wife used to look after the children, but my lad wanted to follow me around, just like any father and son does. So he used to go shopping with me every week, and I took him to Sainsbury's every week. And one Saturday afternoon we were at the till, and ahead of me in the queue was the surgeon that had operated on me as a child. And he recognised me, and I recognised him. We had pleasantries, we exchanged pleasantries. And he said, "So, who's this little lad?" "Ah, let me guess. It's your brother." I said, "No." "It's your nephew." I said, "No." He went around the houses. Yeah. And I said, I thought, let me put him out of his misery. I said, "My son." "Ah, so you must have had an arranged marriage." I said, "No, it wasn't an arranged marriage. It was a love marriage." "So is she disabled?" Right. I said, "No." And this was what I had to deal with. And you could see he had error 404, syntax error written in his head. Yeah. That this isn't right, this isn't what we thought. Yeah. He was a lovely bloke, but it's just his programming wasn't that way. Oh. And that's what I had with society. They wanted me not to, and the disabled people had this. They're expected to only have relationship with other disabled people. Yeah. And that's great if they fall in love with another disabled person. But that's not necessarily the case. That's not the way the world works. I come across so many disabled people now who are married to non-disabled people. Ironically, years later, my wife now has got MS, multiple sclerosis, so she's disabled as well, in her own way. And sometimes the world just doesn't. Hers is not a very visible disability, so the world doesn't process her difficulties the way it does mine. Mine is very obvious. You can see me walk down the road and you'll say this guy's disabled. You'll see her and you'll say there's nothing wrong with her. And so it's kind of, as I say, there's a lot of work to be done in society about making them understand about relationships and disabled people, because that is a big thing.
So how was life like as a husband and a father, the family life with all the things that you were going through, because it's, you've got to earn a living, you've got a disability, you've got society kind of making assessments and judgments about you. Yeah. How did you navigate yourself through that, keeping your family together and supporting them, and also looking at your future?
Well, there's two things here. As a disabled father, I was quite a difficult thing because I had 3 very hyperactive children. Yeah. And I couldn't do things with them that I saw other fathers do with their children. I couldn't pick my son up and put him on my shoulders and walk around like I saw other fathers, and I felt so guilty for it. I used to kick a ball around in the garden with him, but I couldn't run after it the way he used to run after it. And so for me, I had to do things with my children which, today, I'm a grandfather today, and my son, the way he plays with his children, I love it because it brings a bit of happiness to me that he's doing things with them that I couldn't do. and that was hard emotionally. And again, there was no support group that I could turn to, or anybody that could say, I'm emotionally really struggling here. But I just kind of accepted this is what I have to. This is how it has to be. And it was slightly the same with for my wife. I couldn't do those active things that couples do, like go for long walks in the Peak District, or or anything that was too physical for me, was too much. But she was great in that she understood, and she'd never put me in that position. And I feel, years later, feel guilty that she's been deprived of all that. So that took an emotional challenge. But then came the other real bomb that hit me, was that we were in the stage of the early to mid 90s, where bands were no longer popular. And DJs were there. Everybody wanted to book DJs. So I wasn't a super hit singer that I could still carry myself. I was mediocre. I had regular bookings, and I still released an album, which didn't do too badly, not brilliantly, but didn't do too badly. But it wasn't enough to sustain an income anymore. So what I found was I became a nobody again. Amo, the popular guy, couldn't walk down the street anymore. It was, there's a disabled guy walking down the street now. And suddenly my label had changed back to what it was. And I slipped very fast, deeply into depression. And that itself was an eye-opener for me, because I, as you know, as I've mentioned, I left school with no qualifications. I didn't have a trade to turn to either. I didn't know what my purpose in life was. I had 3 small children, and I didn't know how am I going to provide for these guys. I have no skills. Nobody really wants me. We lived in a council house on benefits, and I didn't know what to do, and didn't know where does a disabled father go. Every job I applied for, I didn't get. I had no chance of getting. And these are the days of where employers could openly discriminate and say silly things to you. Oh, we can't give you this job because you won't be able to walk up those stairs. Well, how do you know I can't walk up the stairs? In those days, I could walk up the stairs quite easily. Well, these are the days where, I got a job in a temping agency. They just placed me, I know they still exist today, but they found me an office job. And the manager there felt very comfortable to laugh at me when I was walking and imitate my walk. And he started doing the Hunchback of Notre Dame walk, and fellow employees decided to have a giggle with him. And I thought, well, I ain't going back there. But that's the days before disabled people were protected in the workplace. And so I found myself in a position where I thought, I'm not of use to anybody, and I felt suicidal. It got to that stage. I really did. I sat on a bench in a shopping precinct, thinking, I just need to walk in front of that bus that's coming, because I've got no purpose in life. I was at that stage.
How did you pull yourself out of that?
I think
Did you share those feelings with other people, with your partner?
No, and my partner, in some miraculous way, this years later, she doesn't remember this, but when I was sat on that bench, she couldn't see me because she was across the road with the children. She'd just gone shopping, and she had a little second-hand baby pushchair. My son was in it as a child, baby, and my 2 daughters were just hanging onto the sides, and they were walking with the big smiles on their face. And I'd left them with 50 pence in their pocket to go shopping. 50 pence. And they seemed so happy walking across the road with 50 pence. And I looked at them and I thought, what am I going to do? I'm going to kill myself. They need me. Pull yourself together, Mr. Raju. You've got to do something. And it was that moment. That was and I think it was the good Lord that made them walk past at that moment, because it's what I needed. Had they not been there, I would have easily just got up and walked in front of that bus, because I felt of no use to anybody.
I mean, depression lasts a long time. So did you know at that time that you may be clinically depressed, and that you needed to get some help and support?
Yeah, it was. I went to the doctor, and I said, I need. I just watch TV. I just need some antidepressants. That's going to fix me.
Yeah.
Can I have some antidepressants? Something unbelievable happened in that. I'm going back to the mid-90s, where the doctor said, no, you can't have any antidepressants. I'm going to prescribe you 6 therapy sessions. And I thought, what? 6 counselling sessions. She goes, at the end of those 6 sessions, if I get a report back saying you need some antidepressants, we'll give you some. And I thought, wow. Again, I thought maybe everybody has to go through this. So I said, all right, again. So she referred me, and I went to see this counsellor. And again, long story short, I've never touched an antidepressant to this day. Yeah. What I learned was the ability to talk. And for the next 30 years, I'd had secret therapy sessions, never even told my wife. Because the male testosterone levels wouldn't allow me to admit that I needed help. I was supposed to be the provider. I was supposed to be the eldest son to look after my parents. I was supposed to be the one that fixed everybody's problems. And when I'd started here and became CEO, I didn't want my staff to realise that the boss is weak. He's struggling. I didn't want the funders or other stakeholders to think somebody's in charge who isn't firing on all cylinders. So, these kind of thoughts were all in my head. So I kept it quiet. And I had this relationship. I wasn't constantly depressed. I'd just slip into moments.
So that lasted for several years?
30 years.
30 years.
I still have little moments now when I'm having dark days, but I now have coping mechanisms. Yeah. I know what I need to do. And a lot of this has come with maturity of me understanding the world around me. Most of my depression came from the actions and the reactions of the world to my disability.
Yeah.
And it was only 2018-19 in one of my last therapy sessions where it clicked with me that I just need to move past those people. Those people that are doing this, it's just in their DNA to be that way. I can't change them. I'm just destroying myself, trying to fix them and trying to make them understand, why are you behaving like this? Why are you saying this about me? Why are you talking about this? I've done nothing against you, but people felt confident enough which would hurt me. Or maybe I'm just oversensitive. I used to think maybe I'm just a bit too sensitive to things, but and I just process things a bit better now.
Okay, so you're a young father.
Yeah.
You've got 3 young children, lovely supportive wife, but you are, rock bottom in terms of your emotions, but also economically, jobless, no money, etc. And today you are the chief executive of a large charity, an organisation which is a multi-million pound organisation. How does one get from that right at the bottom, who's hit rock bottom almost, and climbs all the way to the top? Talk us through that journey.
Yeah, well, it wasn't in my plan to be a CEO. Some of this was circumstance, and some of it could have been divine intervention. And the right people came into my life at the right time, and they had angelic presences, which they will, some of them have left this world now. But I, as I said, was feeling pretty low, and I decided that I needed to retrain. And I'm still young enough. I was 23, 24 years old. I thought, I'm still young enough to learn something. And what am I good at? I thought, nothing. So I realised I've got to start with a clean slate. I went to the council house, and they had this partnership with the job centre. And two professionals decided that I should belong with this disability charity. That's just literally opened its doors a few weeks earlier. This brand new user-led organisation called Disability Direct. They had just opened the doors on Normanton Road in the city here, in Derby. And I felt a little aggrieved to some extent, thinking, why are you placing me in a disability charity? But then I thought to myself, well, I haven't really got any options, so I'll go. And I went on the first day. After about 4 or 5 hours, I thought to myself, I ain't coming back here. Yeah. This isn't for me. And as I was walking out the door, the CEO there was a chap called Richard Shaw. He looked at me, and he whether he had some instinct or something, he knew I wasn't coming back. And he goes, Amo, come into the office. And I thought, all right, let's entertain him. So he sat me down. He goes, what's wrong? You've not enjoyed it. It was one of the first tasks he gave me. Again, this was before the internet. He goes, I want you to write down the details. You're going to put together a database of every single care home and nursing home in Derby and Derbyshire, and I had to go through the book, Yellow Pages, and it was an endless task. And I thought, I hate this. He's making me do something that I hate, and he put me in front of a computer which I didn't know how to switch it on. I didn't know what to do with a computer. There was other disabled people around me looking at me, giggling, thinking, this idiot doesn't know what he's doing. He ain't going to last. But anyway, Richard said to me, he goes, I can see something in you. And I said, yeah, all right, go on, here we go. He goes, you're angry, you're hungry, you're angry, you're frustrated, you're hurt. And I said, yeah, probably. I was a bit cocky. I was just staring out the window thinking, yeah, I'm going to get out of here, I'm going home. And he goes, you've done things in your life that other disabled people will never get the opportunity. I said, what? He goes, I've seen here on your paperwork you used to be a singer. What? I said, yeah. He goes, do you think, and he was a wheelchair user himself, he goes, I've never been a singer. He goes, you could teach me stuff about being confident on stage. I said, right. And he said, imagine using that skill set for the benefit of other disabled people, helping them with whatever is on their minds, helping them with whatever is frustrating them. And I thought, oh, okay, yeah, right, I'll see. And I don't know what happened. I went home. I said to my wife, I still said I'm not going back. She says, why are you going back? I said, it's full of disabled people there. She goes, well, have you looked in the mirror? Who do you think you are? What do you think you are? You're a disabled person. And I thought, she's never said that to me before. And it clicked with me, yes, I am a disabled person. And that was a bit of an awakening for me. And I thought, well, okay, everybody around me seems to think I belong there. So I'll give it another go. And I went for the second day, and I went for the third day. And I was still going through, started my counselling sessions as well. So the timing of both of those things were great, because I'd go there and then I'd talk about it with the therapist. And I thought, well, that's great. So this is working. And what I found was a lot of the people that were coming through the doors were looking up to me for some strange reason, as the power of somebody behind the desk being an advisor, an advocate for whatever is on your mind. Again, I loved it, that I had this power, that I could help somebody. I wasn't making them dance like the old days, but I was doing something that would, they'd walk out the office a bit feeling better than they did when they'd come in. And that became another addiction for me. And I thought, right, I need to do more. And I started getting to a stage over a year or two where I wanted to bring in more services. I wanted to do extra stuff. So I'd get frustrated. I'd say, Richard, we need to do this, we need to that, we need to do that. And one of the things he was adamant about that we wouldn't do is benefit support. And he said to me, Amo, don't touch welfare rights, don't touch benefits. It's a minefield. We're not the experts. Signpost people elsewhere. And I did something which I would never advocate to any other employee. I started doing benefits forms behind his back. He'd just see queues of people coming to see me, and he'd say, well, Amo's busy. He didn't realise I was doing benefits forms. And after a few weeks, I think I can't remember whether he caught me out or whether I just confessed. And I said, Richard, they're coming through the door. The minute we've sorted their finances out, we are friends for life. And they'll come back to us now with everything else that's bothering them. And that was certainly the case, because they suddenly wanted to know us all about social care problems, or blue badges, or well, they were orange badges in those days, or accessible holidays, or whatever. And I thought, well, this is great. We're getting a regular client base. And again, circumstances. Richard had to leave for ill health. And we had a short period where there was another chief exec come in who it didn't work out for him. And we ended up with about 3 months funding left. And I thought, well, I'll give it a go. I've got nothing to lose. The board kind of put me into the CEO's position. And for those probably 3 to 6 months, I worked day and night. I honest to God, I didn't sleep sometimes. There was a Christmas period in between, and I remember working Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, writing out funding bids and letters of appeal and stuff. And we got, I think it was February 98 or something, I can't remember. We got a lottery grant come through of around £200,000, which was a lot of money in those days. And I felt great. I thought, the organisation is secure now for the next 2 to 3 years. But Sati, that wasn't enough for me. I didn't like that feeling. I didn't like that feeling that I was having to beg people for money.
Yeah.
That I was having to dance to the tune of funders and their priorities. I knew what the priorities were on the street, because the street people were coming in off the street to us telling us what was bothering them. But funders weren't giving us funding for that. They were giving us funding for whatever the latest whatever the latest sexy project was. That seemed to be what they wanted to fund. And I'd go for that funding as well, but it wasn't what was demanded. What was demanded by our service users. So inside me, I kept thinking, how do I have funding? How do I have finance and resource without wanting to persuade somebody else, without having to persuade somebody else? And a tender came out from the local authority for social care support, and this tender was all about giving disabled people more independence in recruiting their own staff, the direct payment scheme. And that part of that was to deliver a payroll service. And this is how overconfident I was, I wrote in the tender, yeah, we'll do a payroll service. Never done one in my life. Didn't know where to start from. But I wrote it in the bid anyway. And to cut a long story short, my then admin assistant stroke PA, in a previous life she was a bookkeeper. And she ran a few dummy payrolls in front of me. I said, is that easy? She said, yeah, this is how you do. You just get the software, bang. I said, and accountants are charging silly money for this.
Yeah.
So I started thinking, I know what I need to do. We started charging for payroll. And again, long story short, within a few months, we ended up having a couple of hundred clients. And we were making money and charging peanuts. And the word spread, and before we realized it, we had, a couple of thousand clients. And that gave me an income which I didn't have to report on. I could say, right, okay, that's going to fund welfare rights, because nobody wanted to fund benefits advice. I said, right, that's going to fund welfare rights. That's going to fund disability discrimination advice. That's going to fund carer support, whatever I had an idea for. I thought, I don't need to run to funders anymore. And over the following few years and decade or so, we developed into a scenario now where this charity is 92% self-sufficient. The trading arms that have been set up, their profits are funding the charity, and I can do what I need to do. It gives me the confidence that I'm not having to. I can go to the local authority now and say, do you want to deliver a project? I'll do it. And some of them don't necessarily quite like that. They think it's a bit cocky sometimes. Yeah. But we as an organisation have set the template, because other disability groups in the UK are doing the same thing.
Yeah.
We were one of the first. I'll be quite happy and confident in saying we were one of the first to do that. And the concept of charging for services suddenly became my expertise. Yeah. And don't let me paint it too easy. It wasn't easy. I lost a few trustees overnight because they thought ethically that's wrong. Yeah. Charities shouldn't be doing that. And a lot of local authority staff didn't like it that we were becoming too big for our boots. Nothing against local authority staff, but sometimes they like the power themselves, that we could tell this voluntary group how to behave. And suddenly I was able to stick a couple of fingers up when I needed to, without sticking fingers up.
Well, you've done wonders here, and I think your legacy will continue for many, many decades to come. When is it time to call it a day?
We're near there. We're at that. The pilot in my head is saying it's time to land. Yeah. So I have initiated conversations with my chairperson that I need to do a slow exit. I don't want to just walk out and leave. It's my baby. I can't turn my back on it completely. It's going to be painful when I do, but there's going to be a time now that I need to step down as CEO, because there's some fresh talent out there. Yeah. There's some fresh talent within the organisation. There's people with ideas of doing things which I'm probably a bit of a dinosaur at the way I do them. So I have started that conversation, and within months I probably will step down from the CEO's role.
Will you miss it?
Yes and no. I think the board still wants me in some capacity, whether it's just to roll me out in front of the media every now and then. That's fine, I've got no issue with that. But one thing which I haven't mentioned is I missed out on my family. I worked here, and I've given 30 years of my life to building the foundations for a great organisation which will hopefully be here for 100 years or more, but at the expense of my children and my wife. And it really hit me in 2017 when my daughter was getting married, and as she was walking down the aisle at the temple, my eyes filled up, not because I was a proud father and I thought my daughter's getting married, but because I thought she was that big when I started at DD, and how did this happen? That she's been to school, university, she's a teacher, and now she's getting married. And it really hit me that I've lost out. And now I've got grandchildren. And I thought, I don't want to make that mistake again. I just want to be with them as much as I can. Because, life... I lost my father a few months ago, and the thing that taught me was your next breath isn't guaranteed.
No.
So I want to spend as much time as I can with those people that care about me, and I've neglected them. I really have neglected them. They've been brilliant in that they haven't complained once. I would have complained. No. But the characters that they are, they even my wife to this day, she says, you're on a mission. You've got to keep going. And I says, well, I'll go, but then I won't have enjoyed my life.
Well, this organisation gave you national recognition, if not global recognition, and there's always a time to kind of step back a bit and reap the rewards of all that success. Some years ago, you felt that being the chief executive of a large organisation wasn't enough, and you wanted to become a politician.
Oh dear.
How did that happen? Have you always been kind of interested in politics, or was there some unfulfilled ambition in you that you decided that, I want to become a leader of people?
It wasn't about wanting to be a leader of people. In some aspect, I was already a leader within the local disability arena. For me, there was something about frustration with those decision-making bods. Whether it was in the council chamber or whether it was at central government, and over in pre-2013, loads of disabled people used to say to me, "You're a game changer. You don't take any rubbish off anybody. You can get things done. We need somebody like you in the council chamber, somebody talking on behalf of disabled people." And I've never been a political animal in any way. I always voted. That was because my grandfather and my father had instilled it in me that we must vote. Yeah. But I'd never had a strong leaning in any way. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, maybe I can make some change, and maybe I can shout and hold the torch, for disabled people and make some decisions on their behalf. And what ended up happening, I stood in the 2014 election, and I was a bit, what's the right word? I thought I was going to win. Everybody knows Amo Raju. Oh, they'll vote for me. And I lost by about 130 votes or something. It was something like that. That was enough of a margin to really annoy me. I thought, I lost by that many votes. Maybe if I'd worked harder, I could have persuaded them. So the following year I stood again, and I won by a respectable majority. And I thought, right, that's it. I'm going to change the world and become a politician for disabled people. But that's where the naivety really kind of got the better of me. And I entered a world of silliness, of unpleasantness, of people not behaving respectfully to each other. And I struggled, but I thought immediately, I've got 4 years, I've got a 4-year term. How am I going to manage this? Do I just walk now, or do I just see it through? But I've never been a quitter, so I thought I'm going to see it through. see how I feel, and if I like it, I'll stand for a second term. And I wasn't too bad. I became chair of the personnel committee, then I became a cabinet member for leisure, culture and tourism. I wanted social care, but I knew they wasn't going to give me that because I had a vested interest. And I got things done. I made some changes, made some positive changes, but one of the things that was the final straw for me was where the opposition councillors felt that they couldn't attack me on policy because I didn't do anything wrong on policy. So they went for my integrity, and they decided to post something on social media which along the lines of, I can't even remember the exact wording now, but it was a statement saying that don't vote for this one, he uses his disability to his advantage.
Right.
And that triggered me. I disappeared for about a week or two. I just stayed at home, didn't want to know anybody. It got me into deep depression because I've never used my disability. You can't use a disability. But this person had made that connection, and it had gone viral. I didn't even notice the post myself. A couple of other people mentioned it to me, and they weren't happy about it. But in the political world, I thought, well, this is the world I live in. I have to take it on the chin. But my board of trustees sat in this room and said, no way. They go, we want disabled people to take part in the election process, become part of the decision-making process, stand for election, whether it's in neighbourhoods or local authorities or wherever. And this kind of thing is going to deter people. It's going to knock their confidence. So we've got to fight this, not just for you, Amma, but because of other disabled people. And they put a complaint in, and it took over just under a year for the council to investigate it. And that really annoyed me, that it would take them that long to come up with. All they had to do was say, did you do this? Did you go? Let's see the post online. Right, we're going to make a decision. But they took their time, they dragged their heels, not realising what that was doing to me emotionally, just waiting for an outcome. And that's where I decided. I said, I give up. Oh. And the 2019 election came where I was going to stand. And I'll be honest with you, I campaigned half-heartedly. I knocked doors and said, will you vote for me? But I didn't give a monkey's if they weren't going to. Everybody on election night, when I lost, there was people very upset. But I was partying inside. I thought, I don't have to come back to this tomorrow morning. Yeah. This is great. And it didn't bother me. But the one thing I did do in that final meeting in the council chamber, I thought, well, I'm going to go for the jugular now of the process that I went through. And I wrote a speech, and in that speech I made the point that the councillors that are elected on behalf of the public, do they really have the lived experience of poverty, of disability, of homelessness, of abuse, of disadvantage in general? And if you don't understand those things, how are you going to make multi-million-pound decisions on behalf of your constituency, on behalf of the electorate that's elected you? And it wasn't just an attack on that party that had made this comment on me. It was hopefully an awakening for the rest of that council chamber to say, you guys really need to have a think about equality and what you're doing. And the great thing was, one of the opposition councillors stood up at the end of my speech and said that was one of the best speeches that has ever been made in that council chamber. And I thought to myself, job done, pen down, get out of here. And I did. I didn't look back. I was just...
But you did some great work in your ward as well. You made people move around.
I did, yeah. I got a junction. There was some faffing around, what I call it, about the decision as to put traffic lights at a junction. And people had been batting the decision down the road year after year after year. And I just thought, I spoke to the leader of the council and I said, how can we fix this? And it didn't require a lot of extra money, because a lot of this money was put together by the building developers. And anyway, cut a long story short, got the funding, got 2 sets of traffic lights put in, and traffic started flowing through that junction much better. And the giggle at the time was a lot of drivers. Some of the taxi drivers used to say they call it Raju Junction now, because and sometimes when I'm driving down that where I always say to the kids or my wife, we're soon approaching Raju Junction, and it's something that I feel proud of, that years down the road, even when I'm long gone off this planet, the junction will probably still be there, and my name will be attached to it somehow.
Well, I drive through that on a daily basis almost. So from now on, it'll be I'm entering Raju Junction.
It's nice, you know, that if I've made that little bit of a change, just to people on their commute.
Was there opposition to it?
There wasn't any. The opposition was from the people who immediately lived on that junction immediately, the houses there, because they didn't like the idea of traffic lights outside their house. But there was no alternative. There was no other way of doing this. It had to be done, and it's, you know, people were getting knocked over at that junction prior to that. So I'm pretty sure, I'll put money on it, that the accident level has dropped on that junction.
Yeah. Well, Amu, you know, being a Bhangra star, being chief executive of a large organisation, being a councillor wasn't enough for you. You wanted to do something more and capture all that, and you became an author as well, and you wrote this book.
Yeah.
You know, Walk Like a Man. I've read some of this, and you know, it tells the story of a certain chap who didn't give up. Tell us about this.
This book, I mean, you said something earlier, that I've done something. I've done things that not just other disabled people, but other non-disabled people probably won't get around to doing.
Yeah.
And for many years, your friends would be having a drink in the pub, or my wife would say it sometimes, and even some of the staff say, you should write a book about your story. And I said, well, who's going to be interested in that? And then we went into lockdown, and I thought, well, right, I need something to do. And I wrote the first 6 chapters, and then I ran out of steam. I thought, I realised after 6 chapters, I'm not an author, I'm not a writer. I can write funding bids, I can write reports on something or the other, but writing about myself, even though it's my favourite subject, I can't do it. So I called in the expertise of somebody that had written before. And over those lockdown months, we co-wrote the book. And the strange thing was, for me, the book was meant to be for my grandkids and the great-grandchildren, and so they would know that there was this old guy in the family who'd done this. And we said, well, I didn't go as far as taking it to a publishing company and saying, do you want this book? Because I didn't have the energy and the steam for that. So I just thought, well, I'll just publish it myself on Amazon. So, and I did do that. And overnight, it became a bit of a success. It became an Amazon bestseller. It jumped straight to the number 2 position. And it gained some momentum. And suddenly, for the next 12 months, I was receiving emails I was receiving phone calls and messages. In the world of Google, people knew where I was and they got a hold of me. We've read your book. I'm disabled, or my cousin's disabled, or my sister's disabled, or my mum or my dad or whatever. And what you've written about is exactly their story. What they've gone to, the discrimination, the feelings that you had, you've just written their story. Just wanted to say thank you. And what was frightening was that the bulk of those calls was from people in the late teens and 20s. And I thought, whilst it's great that you're buying my book and you're raving about it, the world hasn't moved on.
Yeah.
They said, we're going through what you went through then. And that was mainly from the South Asian community as well. Because I thought, they're still the ones, those conversations about who's going to marry him or who's going to marry her were still happening.
Yeah.
And that really annoyed me. And so it gave me a renewed mission that I'm still Chief Exec of Disability Direct, but there's a louder message that I need to get out there now. I need a community to look at itself in the mirror. I talked to you about my daughter getting married. When on her wedding day, as I walked into the temple, I realized that, I can't sit on the floor. I realized that I'm going to have to sit on a bench or a chair or something. And the priest said, no, you've got to sit outside. I said, on my daughter's wedding, you want me to sit outside? I've got some duties to perform as the father of the bride. And I plonked myself on the stage. And I was going to have a protest. I thought, I don't want to, do something bad on my daughter's wedding. I don't want to spoil her wedding day. But there was the campaigner, the activist inside me said, I'm going to make a stance here.
Yeah.
And you know what it's like. You don't upset Sikh priests because they can get quite angry. But I thought, I don't care.
Yeah.
The hall was still empty. I was one of the first ones in. So I plonked myself, and they kept looking at me like, "We can't. What do we do? We can't move him."
Yeah.
And I actually said to them, I said, if you can sit on the stage, why can't I sit on the stage? I'm sitting at the same height as you. There's no disrespect to the Holy Book.
Yeah.
But that opened a conversation about what's still wrong with our community when it comes to disability. And so I've got this kind of side thing going. I'm still running this organisation with all my heart and energy, but there's this side kind of frustration now that where I say I've got to fix this community. I've got to make it look in the mirror as to what it's doing to 15% of the population. This 85%, what it's doing to the 15%. It's making them feel like third-class citizens. And there are temples where they say, okay, you don't have to sit outside, you sit at the back.
Yep.
I say that's still not good enough.
Yep.
There's benches need to be all the way around if you're going to do it. And I'll take you all on in the courts if I have to, because you're breaking disability discrimination law. And it's just trying to get a whole organisational structure to think differently. You know, I'm not just doing this for myself. A lot of older people go to temples to pass the time. And as you get older, you do struggle to sit on the floor. So why should we make them sit outside?
Yeah.
That's medieval.
Yeah.
It's just something that was what kind of made me realise. It's back to my earlier point. My depression was about the reaction to how society was treating me, and I now want to channel that into saying to the wider community, I'm not going to take you on. I'm going to make you look in the mirror as to what you're doing.
Yeah.
And you know what the scary thing is, Sati? We as a society, as human beings, we don't appreciate difficulties until we are physically going through them ourselves. And I always say this directly to, whoever it is. I'm not singling out priests now, but who feels that. as a non-disabled person, you have the right to say this is how it should be. And I would say, well, one day, because statistically, and I know I'm 100% right, every person on the planet one day will be disabled.
Yeah.
And it's too late to try and change the world when you've become disabled then. Change it while you're non-disabled. And that's what I want to try and achieve now.
And in this book, have you told your story? Have you told what we've just spoken about? It's all in here.
I created a fictional character. My full name is Amajit. We've called him AJ.
Yeah.
We've just shortened it. And Manny and I, when we wrote the book, we wanted a little bit of artistic license. 90% of whatever happened to him in that book happened to me. The only thing that's different in that book is that he doesn't get married and have children. Yeah. Because, and the reason behind that is when I started writing the book, I said to my wife and children, I'm writing a book, do you want to be in it? No, we don't want to be in it. Don't want anything to do. What are you doing? No, stop being silly. Yeah. Write the book, but you write it about yourself, not us. Yeah. And I thought, well, how do I write about myself and not include a big portion of my life? So I had to write it in such a way. My wife does make an appearance at the end. And when the book became successful, then they all said, well, we should have been in it. I said, it's too late now.
Being an author wasn't enough either. Because, a couple of years ago, you got an honorary doctorate from Derby University. You got an OBE for services to the disabled people. You are the Deputy Lieutenant for Derbyshire. How did all that? I mean, those are massive accolades, aren't they? That they don't hand those out to anybody, but you've got those.
I'm still pinching myself sometimes, thinking, has that happened? And I was so busy working all those years, I didn't once think I deserve some credit for this. I was just pleased to be known as the CEO of Disability Direct. To me, that was a great title, a great feel-good factor when I could walk down the street and everybody said, "There's the CEO." But the first one happened. In fact, the very first accolade was I got an email from the British Sikh Awards saying you've been nominated for Outstanding Third Sector Achievement, and I thought, yeah, whatever. Never heard of you, British Sikh Awards. It was their first time they'd ever done something. And I said, okay. And they said, do you want to come down on the night? And I thought, well, all right, it'll be a night out. So me and my wife and a couple of friends, we booked a table. We went down. And we got held up on the A38. It was the awards were in Birmingham. We got held up on the A38, and there was there was a flood, and we were stuck there for 5 hours. So we got to the venue, and the idea was to get there in plenty of time, change into tuxedo and everything. We got into the venue, ran into the rooms, put the tuxedo on, walked into the room, into the hall, and they just announced the winner. And I hadn't even had time to sit down. I just literally went straight to the stage. And I thought, is this real? Have I won? And the brilliant thing was, Mr. Pachungi was there, because he just got an award. And they all asked him to sing Babi Aklar again, which is my track as well. I copied his track. So I got to sing on stage with him on that night. We both sang the same song together. And that was a bit of a dream come true. So I had a great night. But again, that started something for me. I thought, oh gosh, this is not right. I love this feeling of winning something. Yeah. But a couple of months later, I got an email from the University of Derby, and the email was direct from the Vice Chancellor's office saying, we'd like to give you an honorary doctorate. I thought, this is a joke. Doctorate? Immediately my mind went back to me sitting on my dad's lap as a child where he says, you're going to be a doctor. Yeah. And I just kept staring at the email for about an hour. I said, well, what do I do with this? So I picked up the phone and I rang him. I said, is this a joke? And they said, no, it's true. We want to give you a doctorate. I says, what for? They go, we've been watching you for all these years. And, you know, your work, your contribution to disabled people in the local third sector is something we want to celebrate. So, you know, I went round to my dad and I said, Dad, remember you said, oh, you want me to be a doctor? I'm going to be Dr. Raju. And, you know, his eyes filled up and he said, what was meant to be is finally happening. So, and that was great. And then a year later, I got an email from the Cabinet Office in Downing Street saying, you've been put forward for an OBE, do you accept? And I thought, yeah, this is another joke. So I thought the easy way to check this, I emailed back, did a blank email back, and I got a bounce back saying, thank you for your response, the cabinet office will be in. I thought, bugger, this is real. So I quickly emailed back, yes, I accept, yes. And I was awarded the OBE. I had to stay quiet about it for a couple of months. And then literally after the OBE, about a few weeks later, the Lord Lieutenant of Derbyshire came to see me, and she sat in my office upstairs and said, we'd really like you to become a DL, a deputy. I was gobsmacked. I thought, me? Working for you? Working for His Majesty the King? Oh gosh, what an honour! How? What can I say?
So you are the King's representative in Derby,
In a deputy,
Derbyshire.
yeah. So it's amazing. I've done a couple of engagements, and what a feeling that you're treated like almost like royalty when you walk into a room.
Well, you are. You're the proxy royalty.
Oh yeah, it's a strange feeling, and I look back sometimes. I was laying a wreath on Remembrance Sunday on behalf of one of my duties, and I felt so emotional that I was being asked to do this. This poor disabled kid who has been written off was putting a wreath down to those war heroes on behalf of the Lord Lieutenant, on behalf of His Majesty the King. And I just thought to myself, and my wife stood next to me at that time, and we both felt so emotional on the way home, saying, I've just done something that I used to see on the TV happening with very important people. And it was just a strange feeling. But then the other big one, which I was nominated for the Lifetime Achiever Award, and I thought it's a night out in Liverpool. Some of my staff, some of my trustees, and my family. I took my wife and my children with me, and the Lifetime Achiever Award was the last award. It's the one that they're all waiting for. And I thought, I ain't gonna win this. But as Claire Balding, the BBC presenter, her and the organizer started announcing the winner, and they started talking about this person. I thought, that sounds like me. He's been a chief exec of a user-led organisation for nearly 30 years. He's raised millions. I looked around, I thought, he's talking about me. And then when they mentioned the word CEO of Disability Direct, my legs turned to jelly. Because the first thing that was on my mind was, I was sitting at the back of the hall. I've got to walk all the way to the front. And my blood pressure was going all over the place. And how am I going to do this? But I just... 90,000 votes and nominations. I got the top prize, and I was so emotional that night. My trustees were crying. They were at the table at the back. When I got back to them with the award, there were tears in their eyes. My family were crying because they said, finally you've got some recognition on a national stage like that. Okay, the OBE, it meant a big thing for me. But to have votes from people who never knew me, You know, I'd never met.
I mean, these are huge accolades, you know, by any stretch of the imagination. They are huge. To have an OBE, to be the deputy lieutenant, to have a lifetime achievement award, and to be given an honorary doctorate by your local university, these are huge. How does some of the relatives that maybe were questioning your future when you were a child, they may not be around, some of them may be, how have they responded to your success now?
In all honesty, the relatives weren't too bad. It was the uncles and aunties that was the distant relatives, ones, and the family, what do you call them? The journalists, I call them. They like to have a lot of say in what's going on, commentators.
Yes.
But they weren't really actually didn't know the detail of my life. And I think there was a part of them, when I see them now to this day, they still look at me with a slight doubt, but there's an element of pride in them as well, that maybe he's proved us wrong. And one of the things I find strange, because a lot of the people that used to make comments about me, they did make comments, they want to be your best mate now. They want to have some part of your life. They want to be in your life in some way. And it's a strange feeling. I don't feel smug. A part of me feels sorry for them a little bit, that they weren't able to share that journey with me, that they'd be too busy being a critic. Some of them are actually affected by disability themselves now. And I don't think that's karma. I just think that's, as I said earlier, everyone's going to become disabled at some stage. It's just a way that I wish that they had understood me a little bit more, understood the potential of disabled people, not just me, but the potential of disabled people. That to me is something I feel sorry for them about more than anything. As I said, the community, society has a long way to go in general, but within the community where I started, the South Asian community, they've got a very long road ahead of them, and I feel sad that I probably won't be there to see them get to that promised land zone, but I really do wish, for their own sakes, that they understand disability and long-term illness, because it's going to get to everyone.
You now share your experiences on huge stages around the country. You know, you've done TED Talks, and you're a mentor to a lot of people. You're a national figure. Tell us a bit about how that came about, and what does that mean to you now? It's another thing that wasn't in my plan, but because of those accolades that you've touched on, it's elevated me onto the national arena. People want to know the story. People want to feel inspired. They want me to inspire people around them. And so I get called a lot to be a guest speaker. I've just done one last week, and I've got 4 or 5 more bookings already for the rest of the year. And people just want, and I know I'm getting calls on a regular basis just saying, can you come down and talk to people. I get that's on a national arena in terms of talking to groups of people, whether it's a room full of 20 or a room full of 2,000. It's the same thing that I'm going to say to both of those sets of people. But what I find more powerful is talking to people one-on-one. When I'm talking to disabled people who say, I want to be like you, I want to do what you've done, I want some of that. And I say to them what I mentioned to you earlier. I said, do you own your disability, or does your disability own you? And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, Amar Raju has cerebral palsy. Cerebral palsy no longer has Amar Raju.
I says, when you've got having that conversation in your own head, then we'll talk. And now I mentor 2 people free of charge. The rest of them I charge, but 2 of them I'm doing free of charge because there's something inside them I see. There's a little bit of me that I'm seeing in them. They're 30 years younger than me, 20 years younger than me or so. But I'm seeing that there's some. I want to be around to see you get to great heights.
So as you mentioned, you're winding down in terms of your career. What does the future hold for you? Is there still some unfulfilled ambition, kind of a desire to do something in your semi-retirement?
I want to chair the United Nations. No, the thing is, I have this, as I say, renewed side frustration of tackling South Asian prejudice and ignorance towards disability. And so that is something I will continually battle, and I know I'm not going to win that battle in my lifetime, but if I keep making the noises in the right places, I'll hopefully change a few processes and thought patterns. But one of the things that really hit me a couple of years ago, I go to India regularly, and I've done a lot of research into my family and the roots of the Raju family, where we came from. So I've got a strong link to my father's ancestral village, but also where the Raju family originated from. But whilst I was doing that, it hit me, a thought hit me that had my granddad not made that 5,000-mile journey in August 1963, and my father followed him a year later, that I was probably going to be born in India as a disabled person. And I see how disabled people are treated there. I see zero opportunity. They have no welfare state. I see how they are on the scrap heap of society, sat in the corner, and definitely not expected to amount to much. And where there is disability in middle class households, because India is becoming quite a middle class rich country, but where there is poverty, there's higher levels of disability. And so I just did something roughly this time last year, where I raised some funds. I only raised about £3,000. And I decided that with £3,000 I'm going to donate equipment to the surrounding villages where my father was from. Now I know about the charity sector in India, it's slightly corrupt. So I didn't want to go through a charity. I just rang my family member up in India and I said, find me a supplier of wheelchairs and hand bikes. Tell me who needs them. Go around the surrounding villages, tell me who needs them, get them all together on one day, and we're going to donate them. And he did that, to my surprise. I thought he was going to come back with about 5 or 6. He came back with 12. So with £3,000, we not only bought 12 hand bikes and wheelchairs, but we gave some cash donations to help with their medical expenses. Yeah. And one thing really hit me on that day, Sati. At the end of that session, there was one wheelchair left. And I said, why have they not come to pick that wheelchair up? And I asked my cousin, he goes, the girl that we were going to give it to, she passed away that morning. She was that poorly. Oh. She couldn't afford the medicine. And I said, right, what are we going to do with it? He goes, well, we'll give that wheelchair to somebody else. But he said to me, he goes, the girl's father is that poor, he can't even afford the wood to cremate his daughter. So I says, call him here. Oh. So the father came. His daughter had just died that morning. The body was lying there. He didn't know what to do with it because he couldn't afford to pay for it. And there was nobody giving him any help. So we just quickly mustered an extra 30,000 rupees and said, go and buy the wood, cremate your daughter. And that really hit me. The levels of, there's extreme richness in the middle class, but then the poverty levels, those who are poor or are really poor, and no one's helping them. So now one of my renewed missions now is to go every year and make that donation. So I've already started the next fundraising campaign, and I've got around £1,500 already saved, donated by individuals, and I've got another 1,000 or so pledged. And so my aim is to go every year and try and do something similar. But I want to do it wider now. The next level of that is to go to Pakistan and Bangladesh, because the surrounding countries have got even worse poverty. So it's about helping, looking at my roots, the past, where my family came from, and trying to do something over there as well as over here, because it took little effort for me to raise that money, and within 24 hours we'd given those wheelchairs out. And I thought, in this country, for me to do that, it would have taken a long time, and a lot of things that have to be taken into consideration. But over there, bang, done. And the great thing is, some of those people, I get updates and photographs of them riding their handbikes around the village, doing things. Yeah. You know, people who hadn't left their house for months, because they had no way of getting out.
Well, giving direct benefit, I think, has its own rewards, isn't it? You can see the people's lives changing in front of you.
And that's what I want to do. You know, it's you know, just helping where I can. Well, my wife said something to me, and one of the last things my father said to me before he passed away was, you know, all these things you've done and you're doing, make sure they're for the greater good. You know, if you're winning awards, it's got to be for the greater good. Yeah. It's great to have trophies sitting on a shelf, but do something with those trophies. Use it to your advantage. And if you've got a name, use that name to influence others. So that's one of the things I want to try and do. That it's if I've got an OBE, or I am a DL, or I've won a Lifetime Achiever Award, or whatever, then it's great for the ego. Let's massage the ego for a few minutes, but after that, let's put it to community use.
Well, you've certainly done that, Amar Raju. What a life, what a man.
Thank you very much. Thank you.